How do you know that my voice is human and not an AI agent? Or if I am an AI agent and I say something terrible or hurtful or slanderous, wouldn't you want to know who I belong to so they can be held accountable? And more broadly, how do you know if anything is real anymore, where it's so easy to spread misinformation with AI? Today, we are interviewing the founder of a project, Billions.Network, that's trying to solve all of these problems. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I am curious about AI. As longtime listeners of his podcast know, I use that little joke, I'm a human, each episode, because I think that in the future, and increasingly in the very near future, at least digitally, it will be very tricky to figure out who's human and who's an AI agent. Fake photos will be everywhere. Deepfake videos will be rampant. In some ways, they already are. How do we know what's real? Oh, and also, there's a reason the biggest hype words in AI this year are AI agents. I personally am a believer. It is only a matter of time before AI agents go mainstream, and eventually they will be everywhere, whether you like it or not. AI agents to book your travel, to buy the perfect pair of shoes for you on Amazon, to help with your communication. This will happen, is going to happen. There will soon be millions, perhaps billions of AI agents in the world. How do we keep track of all of this? How do we know that an AI agent is who they say they are? These are the problems that a company called Billions.Network is trying to solve. So I am delighted to be joined today by Evin McMullen, CEO and co-founder of Billions. Now, Billions is not just some ambitious idea that raised a ton of cash. Their systems are already in use and they're gaining traction. They've only been around for about a year, but they claim to have just under 1 million users. Their cryptographic solutions are already, to some extent, working with over 100 governments, and they are working on an AI identity and trust infrastructure with government agencies in Europe. It's a long-winded way of saying that Evin is kind of a big deal in his space, and she is the perfect person to discuss how to crack the problem of sniffing out BS in AI and AI agents. We cover a lot of ground in this conversation, from why it's so crucial to verify AI agents to the challenges of doing so, to why it's ultimately the platform's job, not yours, to ensure things can be trusted, and how to grapple with the fact that 50% of content on the internet is already made from unaccountable bots, and that's only going to get worse. How do we solve the problem? Evin gives us some ideas. So with that, please enjoy my conversation with Evin McMullen, CEO of Billions.Network. Evin, welcome to AI Curious.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
So let's jump right into the kind of sneaky dangers of AI agents no one's talking about or not enough people are talking about. What to you is like the core danger you see with today's unverified AI assistants? What can go wrong if we kind of keep going as is?
So, Jeff, when we think about the scale of our internet experiences today, about 50% of internet traffic comes from unaccountable, unidentified bots or, agentic instances. What this means is that, the ability to discover and understand who you are interacting with, where content came from, whether or not something is synthetic or authentic is now perhaps one of the most pressing challenges of our experience online anywhere. I think about AI trust as the new frontier of digital safety. And of course, accountability for agents. What happens when bots do bad things is now an open question, given this new population of the online space that we did not anticipate. And quite frankly, the internet was not built for.
What are some of the concrete ways that this will affect the average person? So you mentioned 50% of traffic, full stop, but do you see the biggest dangers in people interacting with financial instruments, or is it about messaging people and getting phishing things or misinformation? What are some of the kind of the pragmatic buckets you see that to really drive his point home of how unverification is a bigger problem than people realize.
So, human beings did not evolve to mistrust our senses, to mistrust what we see with our eyes, what we interpret and understand that's put in front of us. And so we are not sort of naturally inclined to question, especially as content, as information, as images and video appear more and more realistic despite their sources. So without a way to verify who or what we are interacting with online, be it financial, be it social, be it even, peer-to-peer, appearing to be a person that AI can become a tool of manipulation and harm when we are unsure of the intentions or the origin of those interactions. But our team with Billions Network are solving this by introducing identity and accountability.
Before we go to the solution, I knew you guys were focused on the kind of provenance, if you will, and identity of AI agents. There's also, as you point out rightly, the massive problem with misinformation. And we don't know that the photo that we see, the video that we see, is that real or a deepfake, right? That is, for me personally, that I think is one of my most chilling concerns of AI, that we will increasingly live in this world that many consider to be post-truth. To what extent is this fundamental problem of misinformation and not knowing what images are real, what videos are real, is that also kind of a problem you guys are tackling as well in this AI landscape?
Absolutely. So when we talk about accountability or verifiability for, which bot is that? Who do you report to? Who do you represent, right? There's no way to ask an AI agent, who's your daddy? Take me to your leader. And so, all jokes aside, what we're really talking about when we talk about the accountability and identity of AI agents and being able to determine what content that, they are putting forth or what's being generated in a synthetic manner, we are really talking about the human beings and businesses that brought those technologies into being. And so the first step is to identify the human beings, to enable a verifiable and secure way for you, Jeff, to be able to assert who you are, the fact that you're a unique person, the fact that you're in a certain location, that you're not on the OFAC list, whatever those traits are, in a legal, secure, and scalable manner. And so then what we are able to do, upon verifying the identity of human beings, which is a capability that our team at Billions Network makes possible, we also have invented a method to assign a unique identity to an instance of an AI agent and to relate that back to an individual or business. And so what this allows us to do is create a reputation system for these AI agents, and also a way for not only human beings to be able to verify and recognize who this agent is acting on behalf of, but also for agents to be able to recognize one another. If we think about AI agents like personal butlers, today there is no way for my agent to know that it's really talking to Jeff's agent, and for them to establish some rules about how they're allowed to interact with one another. And when we think about the concept of swarms of agents, groups of instances of AI agents that may be, expert or trained on different subject matter, being able to coordinate those multi-agent workflows where you maybe have one agent that, has a sort of special approach to financial interactions, another that has a special approach to compliance interactions, another that might have, special regional or localization capabilities, using those agents together in a manner that is composable, that is useful, that saves time and headache, requires that they all be able to recognize each other.
Sure. So actually, I love the Butler framework. In fact, one way I often think, and an example I've used before is, and it shows my age, the show Downton Abbey, I think of like the head butler who is in charge of there's the cook, the driver, the valet, right? He's in charge of all these other agents. So I think we'll eventually be in a world where all of us have this like kind of top agents that is then managing these kind of like sub teams of agents. And to your point, yes, there will need to be a common language, a common kind of operating system, and then to your point, a common way to guarantee identity, making sure this is actually, this is in my manner and not someone else's. There's not some kind of like, smuggled in agent who's kind of like who snuck in here. And just make sure I kind of got this right to synthesize this. There's like broadly speaking, two different very big problems that you guys are trying to solve. One is that we don't know what content we see on the internet is human made versus AI made or synthetic. And your system helps us figure out, was that photograph taken by a human being or is that synthetic AI slop? Second problem is we'll increasingly live in a world rife with all of these AI agents everywhere. And we currently don't have any way of saying, who does that agent belong to? And this is a system to peg back AI agents with Joe or Sarah or actual human beings. Am I summarizing that properly?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's accurate. And a couple other elements that I would add into it include that, the affiliation or accountability of an agent back to a specific person or business also requires the, unique identification of that instance of an agent. And for agents to be able to recognize.
What does instance of an agent mean in this
Oh,
context?
so you can deploy an AI agent in different environments. You can train it on different data. And so when I say instance, I mean, an implemented combination of, specifically trained model in a singular implementation. You can use, and sort of AI agent in a lot of different environments, trained on different data, but for a singular instance, a singular implemented use case, let's say of an agent for a particular application or a particular discipline, or in your Downton Abbey reference, the difference between the cook and the valet. That's sort of the line that we draw around, how we think of that discrete entity, that discrete implementation. And so in order for them to work together, we not only need the ability for them to recognize one another, but we need the ability to build rules around it. How is the head butler permitted to interact with the valet?
Right.
How much value can they exchange? What information are they allowed to disclose to one another? And it is impossible to establish these rules unless we have a hierarchy of accountability.
So there's so much to get into here. I mean, this is fascinating stuff. One brief or quick kind of clarifying question. How are you guys defining AI agents, and what distinguishes an agent from like a more typical chatbot? And if someone is spinning up, if a company is creating some kind of internal AI agents, that's kind of like kind of a chatbot that can do some things outside of like a text box, sandbox internally. Are they an AI agent that needs to be kind of get this, driver's license, passport, if you will? Like, how are you guys defining all this?
That is a great question. And I think one that probably comes up pretty often in people's everyday lives. Certainly for the last decade plus, there have existed chat windows on support websites and in e-commerce environments that, folks have become pretty comfortable with. I would sort of differentiate there, noting that chatbots are primarily designed or created to enable conversational interaction. So the chat part of the chatbot, such as answering user questions or providing support. But those chatbots are typically based on pre-programmed scripts with very limited generative capabilities. Their objective is to sort of provide Q&A, like a dynamic FAQ form, frequently asked questions.
Which is changing, right? Companies are more and more working to kind of like, merge LM with their kind of custom data and actually use generative AI for these. I'm just guessing. I'm guessing 6 months from now, a year from now, as companies figure this out, there will be more Gen AI fueled customer chatbots for better or worse.
Certainly. And actually, I want to get into an example about that in just a second. But, the way I would differentiate is that AI agents are, more autonomous and can handle complex multi-step tasks by analyzing context, making different decisions, and even following automated workflows that can involve other entities, other APIs, other actions. And so often we find that, instances of agentic AI are more sort of independently capable of executing multiple tasks as opposed to just, returning basic information. But exactly as you noted, we are now in an era of the two becoming more blended. But this also introduces, exactly as we noted, the importance of identifying and being able to hold accountable the output of these more, iterative, generative workflows. One example that I think illustrates why accountability is so important here is that, recently the airline Air Canada did exactly what you described. They decided to supercharge their chat window, enabling, a more expressive.
This is a great example. Love this example. This is a great one. Give it to us. It's great.
Yes, a more expressive experience. Certainly, better than the press one to change your ticket experience that you typically might have with that kind of service provider. But the difficulty, of course, was that the training and presentation of this chat window on the website was not just question, answer, pre-programmed script, but rather had, quite a lot of autonomy in creating these more complex multitask workflows, analyzing context. And so what ended up happening was that there was a traveler, a customer of the airline, who was interacting with the chatbot and trying to determine, what flight they were going to take. And that, hosted on the airline website, this chat window then proceeded to inform them about the price of a ticket that would be available to them, which they, went on and expected the airline to honor because that was represented by their website, by an interface, on in their own digital space. And it turns out that plane ticket, that plane fare did not exist.
Didn't exist. Nope.
Didn't exist.
AI loves to hallucinate.
And so yes, as wonderful as it is that this, this LLM enabled experience was trying to cut a great deal for this airline traveler, that actually was not, was not sanctioned or permitted by the airline. And so what ended up happening was that this altercation went to court. And it was determined that the airline is responsible for honoring the outcomes of this, this instance and this chat output. And then it made very clear that without being able to uniquely identify this agentic instance outside of the confines of the airline itself, because of course it came from, a combination of technology that was sourced from different teams, different companies to put this together. But there does not exist, for example, a standard insurance policy that a business can buy to cover the outputs of such an agentic expression. And part of the challenge is, again, we said you cannot have accountability without identity, which means how are you going to define and scope and manage risk around implementing such a technology? And so unless we expect that every business who is leaning on LLM enabled or, agentically enabled workflows to be responsible for all possible outcomes, then we've got ourselves in a pickle, right? AI is not deterministic. It is probabilistic.
Right.
And so that means it is impossible to audit every single possible outcome of an interaction.
Mistakes will be made. There's
mistakes
no
will be made.
That.
And so we are sort of in a new era where previously things like, these conversational chatbots were deterministic, had a very bounded and clear set of outcomes that could be well audited and well understood. So we are sacrificing some of that, determinism for a more flexible user experience.
Yeah, it's a real vexing problem, and I think just a couple of things here on as far as that. It makes total sense. I think to say the obvious, companies should, and I'm sure will be held accountable for AI agent action, just in the same way any of us, persons or a company, would be responsible for if we hired like an actual literal agent to do something on our behalf. Like, to go just very colorful here, if I hire a mercenary to take a hit on like a hitman and kill someone, they are acting as my agents. And if they kill someone, I, by law, if they can prove that the hitman was hired by me, I should be held accountable also, right? And so this is, but to your point, that requires identifying the hitman was someone I had hired. So it's crucial to establish that link. And so I don't know why I went total macabre there, but
I will say, absolutely. I think you're spot on. And all jokes aside, this also invokes the classical AI paperclip problem, right? How can we restrain or manage our desired outcomes based on better guardrails for these tools?
So in paperclip problem, for listeners who haven't heard this, classic thought experiment in the AI worlds where what if we tell some powerful AI system, hey, your job is to maximize the number of paperclips. It's like, cool. And there's very clever things to figure out how to create more paperclips. And as they get more and more powerful, realize, first they take all the iron and steel available to them, and then they start turning all the objects in their home, in their factory, in paper clips. They start buying all the raw materials they can find in paper clips, and eventually realize, what's a great source of material, raw input paper clips? Human beings. We don't need these anymore, so they kill humans for the raw input paper clips.
Yeah, human beings are taking up too much space.
Yes,
and that space could be occupied by paper clips.
Exactly.
And so
we need more paper clips. And it's obviously a bit absurd, but I think it's my favorite, juiciest examples of, or like the ways AI can run amok, not because it's like evil, but because it's given some instruction to, hey, your job is to max out paper clips. And if we're not careful about providing appropriate guardrails and alignment, okay, make paper clips, but not at the expense of genocide, right? And so anyway, but that's all jokes aside. That's the cartoonish extreme risk, but there is an infinite shades of risk on that spectrum between, and it can be as innocuous as an airline giving a wrong price of a flight, but that has actually a really big business consequence at scale, right? And so everywhere, so it could be something as silly as like, oops, there's a typo or a fact check problem, to wiping out all of humans. All right, so getting us back, I do want Evan to get back to like before and we can talk about AI agents for hours and hours and hours, and I do want to go there in a moment, but I do want to get back to the original bifurcated problem we had that you guys are solving. There's the mistrust in general that AI is fueling, right? With like, how do we know if this video is from a human or from an AI? And so I want to cover that one a little more before we get into AI agents kind of fun lands. Can you describe a bit about what because again, I agree with you. It's one of the biggest problems that society will be confronting. And there are a bunch of different teams working on different slices of that. Talk about what your solution is and how. One big question I have is, even if there is some kind of like nutritional label on something, on like maybe if there is like behind the scenes, some tag that says this video was by a human, if I am not trained to look for that tag, if I'm just scrolling through social media and I see it, how will it actually, how do we connect the dots to changing human behavior or to actually helping us figure out what's real and what's fake?
So here's a little bit of a spicy opinion. I do not think it is a good use of your time or my time or anyone's time to stare at a screen and be individually responsible for trying to determine whether content is synthetic or authentic. I think that it is much more appropriate for us to go down the tech stack and to start to impose these capabilities on a business, publisher, and platform level. So, for example, actually, some of our colleagues who work over at the local newspaper in Barcelona have already begun using our technology to make it easy to identify the source and creator of images that are published, in paper, to the public. And this kind of gets into what we were talking about with the human layer of verification, right? The individuals and businesses who are behind these platforms and the way that they go about curating and identifying and representing information. Now, we talked earlier about some of the extreme consequences of what happens when you don't have verification. But I want to talk for a minute about how we can safely achieve that outcome. We believe with Billions.Network that verification should be private, should be portable, meaning that it should be visible, useful, verifiable in multiple environments, and programmable. You can create rules around that verification. So, with our technology, we use a method called zero knowledge proofs, basically the ability to prove things about yourself without revealing the underlying
ZK
information.
proofs, the cool kids in crypto call them.
Exactly. Yes. ZK proofs. So actually, our team are the stewards of the most broadly used ZK libraries on Earth, supporting more than 9,000 projects around the world, institutions from TikTok to HSBC to individual builders. And part of the reason that this technology is so powerful is that we can both preserve legality, privacy, while ensuring authenticity. And we can do so without any fancy proprietary hardware, just using, devices that you've got in your everyday life, like your phone or your computer. Now, one of the reasons that the way in which we start this process of identification, the way in which we conduct it and we represent and create that verifiable data is so important is that is the foundation on which other types of proofs, such as the authenticity of an image, are founded. We saw recently that some companies, Coinbase being one of them, have actually not had particularly secure systems built in a manner that uses technology such as ours, and so that has opened up a whole host of potential challenges and potentially scary outcomes, because when you are not careful and secure about the whole supply chain of data for authentication for human beings, and then the programs or the agentic instances or workflows they enable, then you can release a whole lot of private and personal data. And we're talking, earlier about things like deepfakes. In fact, some of the advisors of our very team have been deepfaked, and folks have showed up on Zoom calls pretending to be them quite convincingly.
Eventually everyone, that is like so wild right now. My hot take, I think every listener of this podcast at some point in the future will be my concern. That will be a common story we all have, that most of us at some point will be, if not deepfaked ourselves, we'll see the convincing deepfake and fall for it. I agree. It's such a big problem. And on that front, I'm sorry, I cut you off, but can you say a little more about how your system works? I get that, like, these cryptographic, privacy preserving, zero knowledge proofs form this kind of foundational secure layer to help ensure authenticity. I get and appreciate that. Can you connect the dots for us on how that translates to when we see an image or a video, having confidence that it's not some AI misinformation?
So again, I think rather than, enforcing individual human beings to analyze every single image that they interact with, instead, this is becoming a responsibility of the platforms. And that I think we will begin to associate different platforms, websites, services with the guarantees that they provide about the content that they serve us. So to kind of break down what it means to trust and identify, and an instance of an agent for purposes of this conversation, there are kind of four parts in what we call the deep trust framework. So deep trust is how we assign unique identity to an instance of an AI agent, and therefore are able to attribute the content that it interacts with, the origin of that content, and its relationship with a business or individual underneath. So first, we've got trust in the data. And so this includes the ability to have transparency into how the data is sourced, the quality of the data, its completeness, accuracy, consistency, timeliness, its privacy and confidentiality. So, complying with local regulations and not, doing undue harm to users in the process. And then ensuring a representative data set, avoiding bias through well-curated data. So we establish this trust through things like third-party audits, attestations, which are statements made by one party about another. And we can also use machine learning in a privacy-preserving way. Secondly, for all of my basketball fans out there, we've got trust the process, trust in the training process. And so what we mean by that is algorithmic transparency, right? Being able to discern or evaluate the methodologies that are used in training these systems. We've got bias mitigation, so being able to recognize, identify, and isolate potential biases that exist within data training sets. Then we've got, some amount of governance, ethical oversight. So ensuring that there are appropriate mechanisms to halt when certain guardrails are breached, or to take alternate outcomes when certain results are delivered. Obviously validation and testing. So making sure that, we are not testing in production, but rather we are evaluating these solutions well before they go in front of a human being like you or me. And then the explicability of AI. They're basically ensuring that these models can articulate their learning and decision-making process. So explaining how we got to now.
Which is a real, given it's largely speaking a black box right now. So I imagine it's an extra acute challenge at the moment, I would think.
Certainly. But, we are definitely seeing massive improvements in that. However, it requires, again, the ability to, securely interrogate and test and evaluate these systems. And so, we sort of establish trust to those in a few different ways. We can leverage open source models that, that have a lot of that transparency. Again, audits, testing, machine learning, trusted execution environments. So using, tools like hardware setups in addition to mathematical proofs to be able to secure these outcomes. Then the last two are trusting the outcome itself. So the accuracy and precision of that outcome being validated, consistent, reliable, meeting our objectives. Ensuring fairness so that decisions are equitable across different inputs. Ensuring that there's feedback cycles, so being able to incorporate and iterate upon feedback to improve your outcomes, kind of maintain relevance.
It's almost like this is in addition to the verification that you're doing and creating a system that allows for verification, it's also a more robust AI model audit, it sounds like, from up and down the full tech stack. And so bringing back the examples you gave of to your point, I totally agree with you that it's not fair and it's not practical. It's not realistic to say, you consumer of news, make sure you see in the bottom left-hand corner, you see a watermark with this, no one's gonna do that, right? So we need to kind of shift that responsibility to the platform or publications. So I guess, is it right to say that the Billions solution is a mixture of these kind of verification? I do want to get into that a little more in a bit, how the verification system works, but also it's much more comprehensive as far as from the top to bottom of tech stack, looking at alignment, looking at data bias, looking at transparency. And then the thinking is, will hopefully users eventually say, I will be more likely to use and give my attention to platforms that have proven maybe I have some kind of check mark saying I have signed up for the 37-point Billions plan. I've in the same way a restaurant can say, I've got, the safety, I've got the sanitation department came by and blessed it and says the ovens are good to go, whatever, right? That publications and platforms, if the onus is on them to do this kind of internal audit and rigorous work, and you guys are giving a tool and kind of like the checklists and the solutions to make sure their AI is built in a fair, equitable, transparent way. Am I warm on that?
I love that description, Jeff. I could not have articulated it better myself. And that actually kind of lands us back in the sort of fourth bucket of kind of how we approach this mechanism, which is trusting the owner. So enabling, exactly as you said, this full stack of elements to come down to accountability, a counterparty who is taking responsibility for the actions of AI, especially in cases of failure and harm, whether drastic and existential or interruptive to our travel schedules. And that also, means there is some amount of transparency and ethical leadership required there, adherence to compliance and regulation, which is swiftly catching up to this technology space. And then, ensuring that there is appropriate transparency and recourse mechanisms to engage. So, one of the interesting elements here is that the identity of AI agents and this full stack and approach of this framework that we talked about obviously is composed of many different pieces and trigger many different regulations, especially when it comes to sensitive data about human beings and about institutions. And so, I firmly believe that the future of AI relies on verifiable agents. It is not feasible for the chaotic present to be the reality of our future, but what's likely to occur along the way is the development of more regulation, is the introduction of more trust rails and guardrails, so that it is not a question of businesses simply, honoring their brand value and doing the right thing to undergo this, more sort of rigorous assessment of technology and adherence to guardrails. But I think it is likely to be legally obligated.
Well, that brings up a great point, or you raise a great point, and something I'm super curious about is how these systems and frameworks will even work, because they're competing. I mean, in the time of recording this podcast, 30 more AI agent startups just launched. Right? They're everywhere. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of AI agent startups. There are also many, many, many projects that are built creating kind of the infrastructure in quote unquote rails for AI agents, right? Like there's this, like I don't think anyone really has a good handle yet on how all these agents are going to snap together, how they're going to talk to each other, how they're going to transact. Of course, the Web3 crypto world is super excited about them using cryptocurrency, flinging back and forth. Maybe they'll have it, maybe not. But my larger point is, the infrastructure that is still being built for AI agents is still, for my cheap seats here, very much up for grabs. We don't know yet how it's going to shake out. So given that fluidity and uncertainty, how are you guys developing this ID verification system when we're not even sure what the actual framework will look like yet? We don't even know, how the head butler at Downton Abbey, will they be using a telegraph to communicate people, will be using a phone? How are you guys building this tech when so much is still kind of loosey-goosey into space?
So we are building the plane as we fly it, as they say. However, we can certainly do so in a pretty risk-managed and practical manner. And the way that we do that is sort of with one foot collaborating closely with other teams in this space to bring forth examples of this technology, and with the other foot in the governance space, being actively involved in the discussions around and development of new regulations to ensure that not only the solutions we provide, what we've talked about today, are relevant and useful for the business outcomes of those who are building in this space, but also being able to guide, practical implementations from a regulatory conversation perspective. And actually, Jeff, to drop a little news to your listeners, something actually I've not shared with anybody just yet,
Please.
But it's just
breaking news here on AI Curious. I love it.
Hot and fresh out the kitchen today, I am pleased to note that our work has advanced to the next stage of the European Commission's accelerator program, meaning that our AI identity and trust infrastructure, specifically designed for implementation in Europe, has been selected by the European Innovation Council. Our team already works with governments around the world. We've actually actively integrated with more than 100 different government systems. We are involved in the European Commission blockchain sandbox as well, demonstrating different types of cryptographic technology and the security that they can provide. But what I think is particularly exciting there is, exactly as you noted, this is a nascent space that is evolving rapidly as we record this podcast. And so the privilege of not only illustrating early, instances of this technology and use cases around it, but also being able to influence the way that regulation is responding in a responsible and, reasonable, business-friendly way is a cool balance that I think we are striking.
So congrats on that. And as we wind down, last couple of questions for you. And here's a real softball that maybe I should have asked up top, but I think it might help illustrate and really hammer home toward the end of why this is so important. Talk a bit about why your company is called Billions, and maybe that could segue into a bit of a prediction in the future of how these billions of AI agents might have this massive transformative effect on the world most of us are still not really thinking about.
So Billions is built to scale. The reason that we are called Billions.Network, and Billions.Network is the first universal human and AI network built with mobile first verification, meaning you can prove who you are and begin that journey of agent accountability as a developer, as a business, from the comfort of your phone or your home computer. So no special hardware involved there. The reason that we are called Billions is that this network of human beings and instances of AI agents, exactly as you noted, counts in a population of the billions of human beings, billions of devices, billions of instances of agents, and billions of points of data. And never before has a team, with this approach to scale and approach to integration, tackled a challenge in this manner using a full stack of well-hardened, well-proven technologies. One of the things that I think makes us a little bit different than some of our peers as well is that our frameworks are eminently flexible. Mm-hmm. So as long as there exists more than one company in the world, there should not be one single definition of what constitutes as a valid instance of an agent or a valid instance of an identification of a human being. For example, there are different passport offices in different countries, and that means those governments use different methods to issue their identification cards. There are also national IDs. There are different forms of these types of data, and so that's why sort of our approach allows for many different sources of information, many different acceptable definitions, but all coordinating around the shared trust infrastructure.
And just to give listeners a sense that you guys are not in the whiteboard phase, but are out there in the wilds with users and actually putting solutions out there in the field. Can you give us a sense of kind of where you are on the timeline of users, projects, customers, kind of like they're already kind of experimenting with the solution?
Most certainly. So although, our project is fairly new as far as the history of technology goes, we have been around for, about a year at this point. We have actually grown pretty rapidly in terms of our market adoption. So currently we support just under 1 million individual users, and our collaborations and technology stack, as I had sort of mentioned earlier, are the most broadly used on Earth for certain types of cryptography. So just about every university that teaches zero knowledge proofs is using the libraries that we steward as a team. Just about every institution or team that is using mobile devices in a secure manner to coordinate with these types of systems is using some amount of our technology. So our partners include everyone from government entities at a federal and state level, to institutions like banks, to everyday people like you and me. And actually another little alpha leak here in a few short days. Once we receive approval from the App Store, you'll be able to interact with some of these tools outside of more traditional business environments or application environments. So we'll be launching a Billions.Network native application in the App Store and the Android store. You'll be able to start playing with at home.
Amazing. Great note to end on. Listeners can be on the lookout for that. Congrats, Evin, on what your team has built already. It is not a small, modest ambition. I think you guys have one of the most fascinating scopes and one of the most important and problems trying to crack. Daunting challenge, and I love your approach to it. Thanks so much again. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. As they say, we set no small goals, but it was a real privilege to be here with you today. And I invite all of your listeners to come visit us at Billions.Network, and can't wait to answer their questions and support them on their adventures in this new accountable online.
Love it. Thanks again, Evin. Take care.
All right, we'll see you out there.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to Evin McMullen, CEO of Billions Networks. Thank you to all of the AI agent bots out there listening. You're unaccountable now. Maybe in the future with Billions, we'll be able to account for you and verify you. If this is your first time at AI Curious, please subscribe, rate it 5 stars, send to a friend, send to your favorite AI bots. Thanks again, and see you next time.